the United States continues to face criticism over its handling of the Israel-Hamas conflict. There's mounting calls for pro-Palestinian protests around the world for the U.S. to be held accountable for what many say are war crimes committed in Gaza. Now, to help us unpack the United States' role in the Middle East conflict, I'm joined in studio by U.S.-based civil rights activist and former candidate for the Georgia State Senate, Devin Barrington-ward. A very good morning to you. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here with you.
The public debate in the U.S. insofar as U.S. President Joe Biden's handling of the war is going comes with a lot of disapproval, a lot of comments on the ground on this matter. What's your view as you assess and take stock of how this matter is being handled by President Biden?
Frankly, the matter is being handled very poorly. The fact of the matter is that the United States has been involved in the perpetuation of war crimes via its unwavering and unconditional support of Israel and the Israeli military operation in Gaza. And that is starting to have an impact on the president's poll numbers. And that is going to be really important as we're going into an election year in 2024. There's some serious doubts on whether or not the president and the vice president are going to be able to hobble together that coalition that got them elected in 2020.
Especially with the rising number of Democrats themselves feeling that Biden is showing way too much support for Israel. Yeah. What kind of impact can this have on the president within his own Democratic Party? What will it mean for matters going forward?
Yeah, it means that you're going to be really concerned about what happens in November of 2024 if you're the president or one of his advisors, because we know that the president did not necessarily win by a landslide in 2020. And a lot of presidential campaigns in the last few cycles have been won by very tight margins. We've seen where candidates can win the popular vote but not win the electoral college, and so ultimately they're not successful in becoming president. And so when you are looking at these very small margins in swing states like Georgia, where I'm from, and other places where there is a large constituency of particularly young voters, young black voters, who are saying that we are disappointed by the way that the president has essentially bulldozed into Gaza via the relationship with Israel and via our military resources and our money. This is also at a time where the United States, like many countries, are experiencing a rise in inflation. Most recently, we saw that there is a 12% increase in homelessness across the country in America, which is a massive increase. We were actually on a downward trend for some years. And so many voters are asking themselves, particularly younger voters, particularly young black voters, are asking themselves, is this administration really prioritizing the issues and the concerns that are important to them every single day, as opposed to waging war and fueling conflict in the Middle East that makes all of us less safe around the globe.
And this speaks to Americans assessing the U.S.'s top problems with the Israel-Hamas war, not really among them, because you speak to the state of the economy. There's also issues around and questions around gun violence and border issues, and Biden's poll numbers dropping with a very important voting bloc, black voters.
Absolutely. And a part of the reason why we were seeing this drop in support for black voters is that of black voters for the president is that there's long been a history between black civil rights leaders, community organizers, and Palestinians talking about the shared plight that black Americans and Palestinians experience through the racial subjugation of their communities via these various policies, including military operations in the United States. For black folks, it's oftentimes more in the form of policing. And so there's long been a history of our communities being in collaboration and support with one another. You can go back to looking at civil rights leaders like Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, Dr. King, and others who have said that, the plight of black Americans and the plight of Palestinians are oftentimes very similar. And I think that is why you see a lot of black Americans not necessarily in support of the way that the administration has led on this issue, you see that there is a considerable number of black folks in comparison to other racial groups that want to see some sort of ceasefire, whether that be a total ceasefire or a conditional ceasefire. But a ceasefire is on the minds of black voters, and what we're seeing is that the administration is not necessarily moving in the direction of one of their core constituencies as it pertains to how our views are on this conflict and what we would like to see happen next.
You're essentially highlighting the Black Palestinian Solidarity activism. Do you think it's gaining momentum at this point in time as we reflect on what all of this means for Biden's future? Absolutely.
We can already start to see some cracks in the relationship between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the president. Most recently, in the last 2 weeks, they issued contradictory statements. And I believe that is because organizers like myself and others have taken to the streets demanding ceasefires in Washington, D.C. and major cities across the country as we stand in solidarity with the larger global community. Let's be clear. A critical mass of the United Nations General Assembly voted for a ceasefire, and the United States in the Security Council was the main barrier to actually seeing some sort of binding resolution that would put us on a trajectory towards a ceasefire and an end to the conflict. And so black Americans, along with other racial groups in the United States, have taken to the streets demanding the ceasefire, and I think that that is starting to have an impact on the way that the president is moving with this situation.
I'm going to look at a survey here when it comes to pro-Palestinian protests taking place, and really just trying to get a sense of what sort of balance is needed from Biden. And this survey shows that most would prefer Biden take no position on these in the U.S. or else condemn them more than support them. Republicans are relatively more inclined to want him to condemn them. A quarter of Democrats would look for support. So what sort of balance is needed here?
I think the fact of the matter is that the balance needs to be clear that for folks who are, if this president wants to get reelected, right? If, we are ahead of a major election year. If this president wants to get reelected, he's going to have to listen to the core constituency that got him in office in the first place. And it is that coalition of people of color, that coalition of black voters, that coalition of young voters who don't want to see war. And so the fact of the matter is that the people who made it possible for this president to even take office are the ones that are demanding that we see a ceasefire and an end to the conflict. And if I was advising the president, I would tell him that he should be listening to his core voting bloc.
I hope he's listening to this interview. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming in studio. Devin Barrington-ward is a U.S.-based civil rights activist and former candidate for the Georgia State Senate and the current managing director of the Black Futurist Group, talking to us there about the American perspective on their role in the conflict in the Middle East.